I will never forget the look of utter contempt on my daughter's face as she pointed a manicured finger toward the ballroom doors and said, "Get out of here, right now. You are not welcome at my wedding." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, painfully aware of every pair of eyes in the grand hall turning to stare, while I clutched the handbag containing the $85,000 check that had paid for every last detail of this wedding. My husband, Robert, standing right beside her, didn't utter a single word in my defense. It was in that shattering moment that I realized I needed to start valuing the one person I had always neglected, myself. But before I continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories travel. I was always that mother, the one who sacrifices everything for her children. For 28 years, I put the needs of my only daughter, Chloe, far above my own. I worked 2 jobs to ensure she could attend the best schools, take ballet classes, and wear designer clothes. Meanwhile, I wore the same pair of shoes until the soles literally fell apart. Robert, my husband, always said I spoiled our daughter. "Eleanor, you're going to raise a monster," he would warn, but I'd just wave it off. How could I possibly deny my only child anything? Like so many mothers of my generation, I believe my value was directly tied to her happiness. When Chloe announced she was marrying Liam, I was ecstatic. She was only 25 and he was 27, but they seemed so deeply in love. Liam came from a humble background, much like our own. He was a music teacher at a public school. I liked him immediately. He was polite, gentle, and seemed to treat my daughter with the utmost respect. "Mom, we want a small wedding," Chloe said initially. "Just close family and a few friends." But as the months went by, the plans shifted dramatically. What began as an intimate celebration for 50 people morphed into a grand event for 250 guests. The simple venue she had chosen was replaced by a historic estate in the countryside outside the city. The wedding dress that was supposed to cost $3,000 became a $15,000 imported designer gown. "Are you sure you two can afford all this?" I asked with concern during one of our dinners. Chloe and Liam had just bought a small condo and were at the very beginning of their lives together. "Actually, Mom," Chloe said with a sweet smile, taking my hand across the table, "we were hoping you could help us out. You always said you dreamed of giving me the perfect wedding." I swallowed hard. Robert and I had been saving for years for our retirement. We weren't wealthy by any means, just public employees with reasonable salaries. Still, how could I refuse my only daughter something so important? "Of course, my love," I replied, deliberately ignoring the look of reproach from Robert. "We'll make it happen." In the weeks that followed, I signed checks for decorators, florists, caterers, and photographers. With every new budget that was presented, a knot would form in my stomach, but I'd just smile and say everything was fine. I sold some family jewelry, withdrew a significant amount from our savings, and even took out a small personal loan. Robert was furious. "Eleanor, you're sacrificing our financial security for a one-day party," he argued one night. "It's our daughter's wedding," I retorted. "We want it to be perfect." As the months rolled on, I noticed a change in Chloe. The thank yous grew rarer. The consultations about my opinions ceased entirely. And Liam, who had once been so attentive, could barely look me in the eye when he came over for dinner. A week before the wedding, I went to the final dress fitting. I had been looking forward to an emotional mother-daughter moment, but when I arrived at the boutique, Chloe was already there with Jessica, her friend from college. "Mom, you made it," Chloe said without much enthusiasm. "We just finished the fitting. We were just talking about the bachelorette party." "Oh, I thought we would do this together," I commented, trying to hide my disappointment. Jessica exchanged a look with Chloe that I couldn't quite decipher. "Mom," Chloe sighed, "we don't need you to supervise every single detail. The fitting is done." I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a smile. "Of course, honey. I just wanted to see how it looked on you. On the day of the rehearsal, I arrived at the church early. I had chosen an elegant dark blue dress that I had bought especially for the occasion, spending more than I normally would on myself. When I walked in, I saw Chloe talking to the wedding planner. She glanced at me and frowned. "Mom, why are you wearing dark blue? It looks like a funeral dress." I felt my face flush. I thought it was elegant. Everyone is wearing light colors. "Didn't you read the email with the instructions for the family?" I didn't get an email about colors," I replied, confused. "Well, I sent it to everyone weeks ago." "You probably just weren't paying attention," she answered irritably. During the rehearsal, I realized I had been placed in the second row, not the first, where the parents of the bride and groom traditionally sit. When I politely asked the planner about it, she seemed embarrassed. "It was the bride's request, Mrs. Hayes," she whispered, "to maintain the symmetry of the photos, since Liam's father passed away and will only have his mother in the front row on his side." That stung more than I wanted to admit. The dinner after the rehearsal was equally awkward. I was placed at a distant table, not at the head table with Chloe, Liam, and his mother. Robert, who had arrived late due to work, noticed it immediately. "Eleanor, why aren't we at the main table?" he muttered. "I don't know," I answered, my voice trembling. "It seems Chloe has other plans." On the day of the wedding, I arrived bright and early to help Chloe get dressed, just as I had always dreamed. But when I got to the bridal suite, Jessica blocked my way. "I'm sorry, Eleanor, but Chloe asked not to be disturbed right now. She's getting her makeup done and wants to focus." "But I'm her mother," I protested. "I always imagined I would help her into her wedding dress. She specifically asked for it to be just me and the makeup artist." "I'm so sorry." I returned to the main hall, fighting back tears. Robert found me sitting alone, watching the staff put the final touches on the tables. "Are you okay?" he asked, sitting beside me. "She doesn't want me there," I whispered. "Our daughter doesn't want me with her on the most important day of her life." Robert squeezed my hand. "Eleanor, you have to stop torturing yourself. Chloe is an adult now. She makes her own decisions. But I paid for all of this," I murmured, looking around at the beautifully decorated hall. Every flower, every ribbon, every champagne flute. $85,000 we could barely afford. "Money doesn't buy gratitude," Robert replied softly. "Maybe it's time you started thinking a little more about yourself." The ceremony was beautiful. Despite everything, I couldn't help but cry as I watched my daughter walk down the aisle. She was radiant in her $15,000 dress, smiling at Liam as if nothing else in the world mattered. During the reception, I tried to approach her a few times, but she always seemed to be busy with other guests. Finally, when I saw her alone for a moment, I walked over with a special gift I had saved. "Chloe, my love," I called. "I have something for you." She turned around, the smile quickly vanishing from her face. "What is it, Mom? I'm trying to greet the guests." "It's your grandmother's necklace," I explained, opening the small velvet box. "She wore it on her wedding day, and I wore it on mine. I thought maybe you'd want to wear it today, as a family tradition." Chloe glanced at the delicate sapphire pendant and grimaced. "Mom, that doesn't match my dress at all. Besides, I'm already wearing pearl jewelry." She saw that some guests were watching us and made a decision that would change our relationship forever. "That's enough, Mom," she said, raising her voice. "You are not welcome here. Get out of here right now." The entire hall fell silent. 250 people turned to watch the drama unfold. I searched for Robert with my eyes, pleading for help, but he just stared at the floor, petrified. "Chloe?" I mumbled. "Please don't do this." "I said get out," she repeated, pointing to the door. "You're ruining my perfect wedding with your drama. Leave." I froze, clutching my purse so tightly my knuckles turned white. Inside was the envelope with the final check for the photographer. Another $10,000 I could hardly afford. With my legs shaking and my heart shattered, I turned and walked slowly toward the exit, feeling the weight of hundreds of stares on my back. No one, not even Robert, came to my defense. When I got to my car, I collapsed into the driver's seat and finally let the tears fall. The drive home was the longest of my life. Every mile seemed to stretch on eternally as I drove with trembling hands and vision blurred by tears. I turned on the radio to drown out my sobs, but even the cheerful songs sounded like a cruel joke. When I finally parked in the garage at home, I sat in the car for long minutes, unable to move. My cell phone was vibrating incessantly in the bottom of my purse, probably Robert trying to reach me, but I didn't have the strength to answer. What would he say now? What words could possibly erase what had just happened? I went inside and walked straight to the bedroom. The dark blue dress Chloe had detested seemed to weigh a ton on my body. I ripped it off with a surge of anger and threw it into a corner. I put on my oldest, most comfortable pajamas and curled up in bed, pulling the covers up to my chin as if they could protect me from the pain I was feeling. It was then that I saw the picture frame on the nightstand. A photo of Chloe at 5 years old, smiling with her 2 front teeth missing, hugging me on a beach. I reached out and turned the photo face down. I couldn't look at that face right now. At 3 in the morning, I heard the front door open. Robert's heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. I pretended to be asleep when he entered the room. I felt the mattress dip as he sat on the edge of the bed. "Eleanor," he whispered, touching my shoulder. "I know you're awake." I remained still, my eyes squeezed shut. "What happened was horrible," he continued, his voice tired. "Chloe crossed a line. I tried to talk to her afterward, but she wouldn't listen. I opened my eyes and turned to face him. And why didn't you say anything in the moment? Why did you just stand there like a statue while your daughter humiliated me in front of everyone?" Robert looked away, ashamed. I was in shock. "By the time I realized what was happening, you were already gone. I was a coward, Eleanor, and I'm so sorry." "You're sorry?" I sat up in bed, the anger finally overpowering the sadness. $85,000, Robert. $85,000 we saved for years. Our retirement, our emergency savings, all poured into her perfect day. And how does she thank me? By kicking me out like I'm an intruder. "I know," he murmured. "It was a mistake. You were right, and I was wrong. We never should have given her that money." Something in that late confession broke a dam inside me. I started to cry again, but these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, frustration, and years of self-denial that suddenly seemed terribly wasted. She didn't let me help her get dressed, Robert, her own mother. They put me in the second row at the church like some random guest, and that table in the corner, away from everyone. It was humiliating. He tried to hug me, but I pulled away. "No," I said firmly. "I don't want your comfort right now. It's too late." The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was a text from Jessica. "Eleanor, Chloe, and Liam are leaving for their honeymoon now. She asked me to let you know she'll try to talk to you when they get back in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. She couldn't even be bothered to call and apologize before jetting off on the honeymoon that, of course, we had also helped pay for." I got up and went to the office where I kept all the documents related to the wedding. I opened the meticulously organized folder and began to go through every contract, every receipt, every bank transfer. $85,000, the equivalent of years of savings, daily sacrifices, vacations not taken, clothes not bought. And for what? To be treated like an intruder at the event I had single-handedly financed. Robert appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. "What are you doing?" "Tallying up how much it cost to be humiliated by my own daughter," I replied, without looking up from the papers. He placed a cup beside me and sat in the opposite chair. "Eleanor, we need to talk about what happened yesterday." "There's nothing to talk about. Our daughter made it very clear what she thinks of me. She was stressed, under pressure. All those guests, the expectations." I looked up, incredulous. "Are you defending what she did?" "No, of course not," he backtracked. "What she did was unforgivable. I'm just trying to understand why she acted that way." "I know exactly why," I answered bitterly. "Because for 28 years I taught her that she can have whatever she wants with no consequences. that Mom will always be there to foot the bill and then be tossed aside when she's no longer useful. The following days passed in a blur of sadness and rage. I didn't go to work. I barely ate. I spent hours looking at old photos, trying to pinpoint when my sweet little girl had transformed into the cruel woman at the wedding. On the third day, the doorbell rang. It was Karen, Liam's mother, holding a small basket of muffins. "Eleanor, may I come in?" she asked gently. I hesitated but ended up opening the door. We hadn't gotten along very well during the preparations. Karen was reserved and quiet, the opposite of my intense involvement. We sat in the living room in an awkward silence before she finally spoke. "What happened at the wedding was terrible," she said directly. "I came to apologize." "You have nothing to apologize for," I replied. "You weren't the one who threw me out, but I didn't defend you either," she admitted. "No one defended you, and we all know how much you sacrificed to make that day possible." Her kind words broke through the hard shell I was trying to build around my heart. Before I knew it, I was crying again, with Karen holding my hands between hers. "Why did she do this to me?" I asked between sobs. "What did I do wrong?" Karen sighed. "I don't know, Eleanor, but I've known Liam for 27 years, and I've never seen him as ashamed as he was after what happened. He tried to convince Chloe to postpone the honeymoon to sort things out with you, but she insisted on leaving as planned. That information caught me by surprise." "He did that?" She nodded. Liam was horrified by her attitude. He said this wasn't what he envisioned for his marriage. After Karen left, I kept thinking about our conversation. If even Liam, who clearly loved Chloe, was shocked by her behavior, maybe the problem wasn't me. Maybe I hadn't been as terrible a mother as I felt in that moment. A week after the wedding, I received an email from Chloe. Not a call, not a visit, but a cold, distant email. "Mom, I hope you've gotten over the drama at the wedding. It was a stressful day for everyone, and you weren't helping with your controlling behavior. Liam and I are having a great time here in Cancun. The resort is incredible. Thanks for helping with the plane tickets. When we get back, we hope you'll be calmer so we can move on as a normal family. Kisses, Chloe." I read and reread those lines, unable to believe what I was seeing. Not a word of apology, not an acknowledgement of what she had done. On the contrary, she was blaming me for the drama. That message was the trigger. Something inside me finally broke, or maybe it finally healed. For my entire adult life, I had defined myself primarily as Chloe's mother. I had put her needs above my own, her dreams above my own, her well-being above my own. And for what? To be discarded when I was no longer convenient? I made a decision in that moment. It was time to think about myself. The decision to prioritize myself after decades of self-neglect wasn't easy. In the days following Chloe's email, I experienced a roller coaster of emotions. Guilt for abandoning my daughter, rage at her ingratitude, fear of what it would mean to rebuild my identity at 54. Robert noticed the change in my behavior almost immediately. "You're different," he commented during dinner, a week after the wedding. More determined. I put my fork down and looked him straight in the eye. "I'm tired, Robert. Tired of being used and then thrown away. From now on, I'm going to live for me." "And what does that mean exactly?" he asked cautiously. "It means I will no longer be Chloe's personal bank, nor her emotional doormat. And it also means," I took a deep breath, "that I'm reconsidering many things in our life." His eyes widened. "Are you talking about us?" "I'm talking about everything. Our marriage, my career, how we spend our money, everything." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the last 28 years. How much of myself had I lost along the way? Who was I besides Chloe's mother or Robert's wife? The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had coffee alone. Robert had already left for work, and I made a list in my notebook. Things I want for myself. Go back to school, travel, alone, redecorate the house to my taste, reconnect with old friends, take care of my physical and mental health. It was a simple list, but it represented a revolution in my life. That same day, I enrolled in a master's program in literature, a dream I had abandoned when Chloe was born. I also scheduled an appointment with a therapist and signed up for yoga classes. A week later, I received a call from Liam. I was surprised to see his name on the caller ID. They were still supposed to be on their honeymoon. Eleanor, it's Liam. Can we talk? His voice sounded tense, worried. Of course, Liam, what's wrong? Aren't you supposed to be in Cancun? He sighed heavily. We came back early. Things are not good. Did something happen to Chloe? I asked, my motherly instincts immediately kicking in. She's fine physically, he assured me. But can I come by your house this afternoon? I'd rather talk in person. I agreed, intrigued and slightly apprehensive. Liam arrived at 4, looking exhausted and dejected. I invited him in and offered him a coffee, which he accepted gratefully. Where's Robert? He asked, looking around. Working. He won't be back before 7. He seemed relieved. Good. Because what I have to say is difficult and, well, it's about Chloe. We sat in the living room and for a few moments, Liam just swirled the coffee cup between his hands, avoiding my gaze. Eleanor, first of all, I want to apologize for what happened at the wedding. It was unforgivable. You didn't do anything, I replied automatically. Exactly, I did nothing, he said, bitterness in his voice. I just stood there while she treated you that way. After everything you did for us, it was cowardly of me. I was moved by his words, but also confused. Liam, I appreciate your apology, but I'm sure you didn't come here just for that. What's going on? He took a deep breath. We came back from the honeymoon after only 4 days because, well, we had a terrible fight about money. Money? I repeated, surprised. Yes, I found out that Chloe made several extremely expensive purchases in the last few months. Jewelry, designer clothes, even a $15,000 handbag, all behind my back. When I confronted her about it, she said you would cover the costs like you always do. I felt my face burn. I knew nothing about that, and I'm not going to pay for it. I figured as much, he said sadly, and that's what I told her. We had a horrible argument. Chloe became furious when I suggested we should live according to our own means. She said her pathetic mom would always end up paying because I can't say no. Every word was like a stab wound. Was that how my daughter saw me? As a pathetic mom who could be endlessly manipulated? There's more, Liam continued, clearly uncomfortable. Chloe confessed that she planned to ask you to help us buy a bigger house after the wedding. She had even already visited properties that cost triple what we can afford. I sat in silence, absorbing the shock of these revelations. The sheer scale of Chloe's manipulation was hard to process. Why are you telling me this, Liam? I finally asked. He looked up, his eyes determined. Because you need to know the truth. And because I don't want to live like this, Eleanor. I didn't marry Chloe to exploit her parents. I want to build our life with our own resources, even if it's more modest than she imagines. And does Chloe know you came to talk to me? No, he admitted. She went to a friend's house after our fight. She says she won't come back until I come to my senses about our lifestyle. When Liam left, I sat in the same spot for hours, trying to process everything I had discovered. My daughter not only saw me as a bank, but she had been planning to continue exploiting me indefinitely with a calculated coldness I could never have imagined. That night, I told Robert everything. To my surprise, he didn't seem shocked. I always knew she had that manipulative streak, he said calmly. That's why I tried to warn you for years, but you always defended her, always made excuses. And now, I asked, feeling lost, what do we do? Robert took my hand. Nothing. We do absolutely nothing. It's time for Chloe to grow up and face the consequences of her own choices. The next day, I got the call I had been dreading. Mom? Chloe's voice sounded sweet and syrupy over the phone. How are you? Fine, I replied dryly. And you? I heard you came back from the honeymoon early. There was a noticeable pause. Who told you that? Does it matter? She quickly changed the subject. Mommy, I was thinking, could you and Dad come over for dinner on Sunday? To celebrate properly, since at the wedding. Since at the wedding you threw me out in front of all the guests? I finished for her. Oh, Mom, you're always exaggerating. It was just a moment of stress. Let's just forget it, okay? I took a deep breath, feeling the old Eleanor wanting to give in, wanting to keep the peace at any cost. But the new Eleanor, the one who was learning to value herself, spoke louder. No, Chloe, I'm not going to forget. What you did was cruel and humiliating. Mom, please. Her tone shifted, now sounding irritated. Don't be dramatic. I'm trying to fix things here. Trying to fix things? Or trying to make sure your personal bank stays open for business? I asked directly. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. I don't know what you're talking about, she finally replied, her voice a pitch higher than normal. Liam was here yesterday, I revealed. He told me about the debts, about your plans for us to finance a new house for you. That traitor, she exploded, completely abandoning the sweet tone. How dare he talk about our private life with you? Our private life? I repeated, incredulous. Chloe, you were planning to use my money. That makes me part of the equation, don't you think? What's yours is mine, Mom. It's always been that way. You always said you'd do anything for me. And I did, I replied calmly, including bankrupting my savings for a wedding where I was treated like an intruder. But it's over, Chloe. The tap has run dry. She started to cry. That manipulative cry I knew from the time she was a little girl, the same one that always made me give in. How can you do this to me? I'm your only daughter. Exactly. My daughter, not my owner. And it's time you learned the difference. I hung up the phone before she could respond. My hands were trembling, but not from fear or guilt. It was the feeling of liberation, powerful, terrifying, and completely new to me. Robert came home that night to find me sitting in the backyard watching the sunset with a glass of wine in my hand, something I hadn't done in years. You look different, he commented, sitting in the chair beside me. I spoke with Chloe today, I replied, not taking my eyes off the orange horizon. I told her we're no longer financing her extravagances. And how did she react? I took a sip of wine before answering. How do you think? She cried, she yelled, she accused me of abandoning her. Robert was silent for a moment. Are you okay? I turned to look at him, surprised by the question. In all the years of our marriage, Robert rarely asked how I was feeling. Maybe because I always gave the impression that everything was under control. Strangely, yes, I answered honestly. It's as if a huge weight has been lifted from my shoulders, a weight I carried for so long I didn't even realize it was there. He nodded slowly. You know, Eleanor, I've always admired your strength, but sometimes I worried about how much you sacrifice for Chloe. For all of us, really. That confession caught me by surprise. You never said anything. I tried a few times, but you always seemed so determined to be the perfect mother, the perfect wife, as if you needed to prove something. His words touched on a truth I had never fully admitted to myself. For my entire adult life, I had been driven by a desire to be indispensable, to be loved through my utility. It was a pattern that began in my own childhood, with emotionally distant parents who only seemed to notice my existence when I performed some task for them. I think I did need to prove something, I admitted. To Chloe, to you, to myself. And now. I paused, searching for the right words. Now I want to find out who I am when I'm not taking care of everyone around me. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the doorbell. It was barely 7:30 a.m. Robert had already left for work, so I went downstairs to answer, still in my pajamas. To my surprise, it was Chloe. Her eyes were red and swollen, as if she had been crying all night. She was wearing casual clothes, jeans, and a t-shirt, something rare for her, as she always took great care to be impeccably dressed. "Can I come in?" she asked in a small voice. I hesitated for a moment but ended up opening the door. Chloe came in and sat on the living room sofa, looking out of place in her own childhood home. "Want some coffee?" I offered mechanically. She shook her head. "Liam left me." Those 3 words hung in the air between us. I didn't show surprise or pity. Something inside me had been expecting it. "What happened?" I asked, sitting in the armchair opposite her. "He said he doesn't recognize me anymore," she replied, looking at her own hands. "That he can't build a marriage with someone who treats her own mother like I treated you." I remained silent, watching her. Part of me wanted to hug her, to tell her everything would be okay, to take on the responsibility of fixing this situation once again. That's what the old Eleanor would have done. "He told me about his visit here," Chloe continued, "about your conversation. And he said he agrees with you, that we can't start our life together by exploiting his parents or mine, that I need to grow up and take responsibility for my own choices." A tear rolled down her face, followed by another and another. "He's right," I finally replied, "and you know it." "So that's it?" she asked, looking up with teary eyes. "Are you going to abandon me too, when I need you most?" That question hit me hard. For an instant, guilt began to creep back in, but then I remembered the wedding, the public humiliation, the cold email, the plans to keep using me indefinitely. "I'm not abandoning you, Chloe," I answered calmly. "I'm setting healthy boundaries. There's a big difference." "What boundaries?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I can't count on my own mother anymore. You can count on me for emotional support, for advice, for a shoulder to cry on when you need it," I explained. "But not as your personal bank, not as your doormat, not as someone you can publicly humiliate when you're in a bad mood and then expect to come crawling back." Chloe wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I came to apologize for what I did at the wedding. It was horrible, unforgivable." "Why did you do it?" I asked, the question that had been tormenting me for days. She looked away. "I don't know. I was stressed, nervous. Jessica kept saying you were trying to steal my spotlight, that it was my day, not yours. And you believed her?" "Yes," she admitted in a low voice, "but I also think a part of me was resentful. You were always so perfect, so controlling, so present. Sometimes I felt like I couldn't breathe." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was true. In my desire to be the perfect mother, perhaps I had suffocated Chloe without realizing it. "I understand," I replied slowly, "but that doesn't justify what you did, nor the plans to continue using me financially." "I know," she murmured, "and I'm truly sorry. For everything." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of years of dysfunctional dynamics hanging between us. "What now?" Chloe finally asked. "Now?" I took a deep breath. "You go home and try to save your marriage, if that's what you want. You take responsibility for your expenses and your debts. You learn to live within your means. You grow up, and us? Where do we stand? We need to rebuild our relationship, Chloe, from scratch, based on mutual respect, not on dependence or manipulation." She nodded slowly, as if processing the reality of a new dynamic between us. "It will be hard? Yes, it will be, for both of us." After Chloe left, I felt a confusing mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to call Liam, to beg him to give my daughter another chance. Another part wanted to run after her, hug her, and tell her everything was fine, that I would pay her debts, that we would do everything her way. But I resisted those impulses. It was time to break the cycle. In the following weeks, I immersed myself in my personal wish list. I started the literature masters and found myself completely passionate about my studies. The therapy sessions, though painful, were helping me unearth old patterns and create new ones. Robert and I also began to rediscover our relationship beyond being Chloe's parents. We went out for dinner, talked about books, planned a trip to Europe. something I had always dreamed of but constantly postponed in favor of Chloe's needs. A month after our conversation, Chloe called me. "Mom, I have some news." "I'm listening," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Liam and I are back together," she said, a smile audible in her voice. "We're going to couples therapy. And I'm working full-time now. I got a promotion at the office." "That's wonderful, honey," I replied sincerely. "I'm proud of you. I also started organizing our finances," she continued. "You wouldn't believe the amount of money we spent on nonsense. We're saving to pay off the debts." I felt a wave of cautious hope. Maybe, just maybe, something good could come out of this disaster. "And there's something else," Chloe said hesitantly. I wanted to invite you to dinner at our place on Friday, just the four of us. Me, Liam, you, and Dad, to start over. If you want, of course." I was surprised by the invitation and the genuinely humble tone in her voice. It wasn't the manipulative tone I knew so well. "I'd love that," I replied. "What can I bring?" "Just yourselves," she said. "I'm cooking." That caught me by surprise. Chloe never cooked. Well, we'll be there then. After hanging up, I thought about how life could change so quickly. 2 months ago, I was a woman whose entire identity was tied to being a mother and wife, always available, always sacrificing my own needs, always trying to buy love and approval. Now, at 54, I was finally learning to set healthy boundaries, to say no, to put on my own oxygen mask first, as they say on airplanes. And surprisingly, everyone seemed to be breathing better for it. The dinner at Chloe and Liam's was surprisingly pleasant. I arrived tense, expecting the worst, maybe more manipulation, maybe an awkward atmosphere. But I found a different Chloe than the one I knew. She had prepared a simple but tasty meal. The table was set with care, with flowers from the garden in a ceramic vase I recognized as a school project of hers from high school. The condo, a small 2-bedroom they had bought before the wedding, was clean and cozy. "Welcome," Chloe said, opening the door with a hesitant smile. "Thanks for coming." Robert and I entered, and Liam greeted us with warm hugs. There was a new dynamic between him and Chloe, something more balanced, more mature. During dinner, we talked about light topics: my new course, Robert's work, Chloe's promotion. It was only at dessert that my daughter brought up the elephant in the room. "Mom, Dad," she began, putting her fork down, "I want to thank you for being here today. I know I haven't been the best daughter lately." Robert and I exchanged quick glances, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "Therapy has helped me see some bad patterns in my behavior," she continued, "mainly how I treated you both, but especially you, Mom." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Chloe, we don't need to talk about that now." "Yes, we do," she insisted gently, "because I want you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm working to change." Liam took her hand on the table, a silent gesture of support. "What happened at the wedding was unforgivable," Chloe continued, "and I completely understand if you can never fully forgive me, Mom. But I want you to know that I am truly sorry. Not just for the incident itself, but for years of selfish and manipulative behavior." Silent tears began to roll down my face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief, of acknowledgement. "The truth is, I always saw you as this superwoman," she continued, her eyes also welling up. "So strong, so capable, so willing to sacrifice for me. And instead of admiring that, I ended up resenting it, as if your unconditional love was a burden to me, an impossible expectation to meet." Robert took my hand under the table, squeezing it gently. "And the more you gave, the more I demanded," Chloe admitted, "until we reached that terrible point at the wedding where I just exploded. I unleashed on you all the frustration, all the accumulated resentment, without realizing I was hurting the person who sacrificed the most for me." "I made mistakes too, Chloe," I finally replied. "Maybe I was suffocating at times, controlling, trying to buy your love with money and sacrifice. Still, there was no justification for what I did," she insisted. or for how I plan to continue exploiting you financially. Liam intervened softly. We're working hard to organize our finances. Chloe sold a lot of the designer clothes and accessories she bought. We're living more modestly within what we can afford. And it's better this way, Chloe completed. More honest, more real. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her for the first time in a long time. Not as the child who needed to be protected and pleased at all costs, not as the ungrateful young woman who had humiliated me, but as the adult woman she was becoming, imperfect, growing, trying to find her own way. I'm proud of you, Chloe, I said sincerely. Of both of you, actually. It's not easy to take responsibility for your own mistakes. We're learning, Liam smiled, day by day. When Robert and I left, Chloe hugged me at the door. Not the quick, mechanical hug that had become our pattern in recent years, but a long, tight hug, the kind we shared when she was little. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she whispered in my ear. "I would never give up," I replied. "We just needed to find a healthier balance." In the car, Robert drove in silence until he finally spoke. "Well, that was surprising." "Good or bad?" I asked. "Definitely good," he smiled. "I've never seen Chloe so mature, so present. Usually she's too busy checking her phone or talking about herself." I nodded, reflecting on the night. "I think we're all growing up." The following months brought a new dynamic to our family. Chloe and I began to build a different relationship, still close, but with clearer boundaries. We talked about books, movies, ideas, instead of just problems to be solved or desires to be funded. One Saturday afternoon, 5 months after the wedding, Chloe appeared at my door with a large envelope. "What's this?" I asked, inviting her in. "Something I should have done a long time ago," she replied, handing me the envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000, a modest amount compared to what I had spent on the wedding, but significant considering her salary. "Chloe, you didn't have to—" "Yes, I did," she insisted. "It's the beginning of what I intend to pay back to you and Dad. I know it doesn't even begin to cover everything you spent on me, but it's a start. Liam and I decided we're going to set aside a percentage of our salaries every month for this." I was speechless. "I'm not doing this to redeem myself or to buy your forgiveness," she explained. "I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, because I want our relationship to be based on respect, not on debt." I hugged her, deeply moved by the gesture. "The money is the least important part, honey. What you're demonstrating with this is what really counts." As Chloe and Liam worked to rebuild their lives with more financial responsibility, I continued my own journey of self-discovery. My master's in literature was opening doors I never imagined possible. A professor suggested I turn my thesis into a book. I started attending literary events, meeting new people, expanding my horizons beyond the walls of my home. Robert also seemed to be flourishing. With less financial pressure, now that we weren't constantly subsidizing Chloe's expenses, he began planning an early retirement to pursue his dream of opening a small carpentry shop. "You know, Eleanor," he commented one night as we were planning our trip to Europe, "I think Chloe's wedding was the best thing that could have happened to us." "How so?" I asked, surprised. "Not the event itself, of course," he quickly clarified, "but what came after. The crisis, the change. It's as if we all needed that shock to break out of the roles we were stuck in." I reflected on his words. It was true. That public humiliation, as painful as it had been, had served as a catalyst for necessary transformations in all our lives. I will never forget the pain I felt that day, the look of contempt on my daughter's face, the indifference of my husband, the shame of walking through the guests towards the door, feeling diminished and disposable. But I will also never forget the strength I discovered in myself afterward, the courage to say no, to set boundaries, to demand respect, to prioritize myself without guilt. It was a lesson that had taken me more than 50 years to learn, but it was now etched into my soul. Loving others doesn't mean erasing yourself. On the contrary, True love is only possible when both parties respect each other as whole and worthy individuals, and that, more than any amount of money, was the legacy I wanted to leave for my daughter. A year after the wedding disaster, I received an unexpected invitation. It was an elegant card delivered personally by Chloe one Sunday afternoon. "What is this?" I asked, examining the textured paper envelope. "Open it," she smiled, visibly excited. Inside, I found a formal invitation. Liam and Chloe Hayes have the pleasure of inviting Eleanor and Robert Hayes to celebrate their first wedding anniversary with an intimate vow renewal, Saturday, June 15th at 4 p.m., Municipal Botanical Garden. I looked at Chloe, confused. A vow renewal? After only 1 year? She sat beside me on the sofa, her face more serene and mature than I remembered. "It's not a traditional vow renewal," she explained. "It's more like a new beginning. Liam and I feel like our marriage started the wrong way with the wrong values. We want to mark this first year by celebrating what we've learned and the new foundation we've built." I was moved by the idea, but also apprehensive. The last event involving Chloe, Liam, and the word wedding hadn't ended well for me. "It'll be something small," she continued, noticing my hesitation. "Just 20 people, close family, and a few friends who really matter, in the Rose Garden with a simple brunch afterward." "It sounds lovely," I replied, still cautious. "And," she added, taking my hand, "we'd like you to be our matron of honor, if you want, of course." That took me completely by surprise. "Matron of honor? Me?" "Yes," Chloe smiled. "Because without you, without the lessons of this past year, we wouldn't have the marriage we have today. We wouldn't be the people we're becoming." Tears formed in my eyes. I don't know what to say. "Say yes," she squeezed my hand, "and know that this time you'll be the guest of honor, not the invisible sponsor." On the day of the ceremony, the weather was perfect. Blue skies, a gentle breeze rustling the rose petals. The setting couldn't have been more different from the original wedding. Instead of a historic estate with crystal chandeliers and extravagant arrangements, we were in a public garden with simple decorations made by the bride and groom themselves. Chloe wore a modest white dress bought from a department store, with wildflowers in her hair, instead of the diamond tiara she had worn the year before. Liam wore a navy suit I already knew, the same one he had worn on special occasions for years. Before the ceremony began, Chloe pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the garden. "Nervous?" I asked, adjusting a flower in her hair. "A little," she admitted. "But not about the event itself. It's just, I want to get everything right this time." I smiled, recognizing in her the same perfectionism that had always lived in me. "Do you know what I've learned this past year, honey? That right doesn't mean perfect. It means authentic, honest." She nodded, absorbing my words. "And there's something else," she said, opening the small clutch she was carrying. "This is for you." It was an antique jewelry box I recognized immediately. It had belonged to my mother. "I found this among my things when we were reorganizing the apartment," Chloe explained. "You gave it to me when I graduated from college. Remember? You said it was to keep my most precious jewels." I opened the box slowly. Inside, to my surprise, was my grandmother's sapphire pendant, the very one Chloe had so harshly rejected on her wedding day. "I'd like you to wear it today," Chloe said, her voice cracking. "And then, if you'd be willing to lend it to me for the ceremony, I would be honored to wear it too." I was speechless, moved by the symbolism of the gesture. That necklace represented generations of women in our family, a tradition I had feared was broken forever. "It would be an honor," I finally replied, letting her place the necklace around my neck. The ceremony was simple and emotional. Instead of traditional vows, Liam and Chloe wrote personal promises to each other, emphasizing values like honesty, respect, and shared responsibility. In a moment that took me by surprise, Chloe turned to me and Robert in the small audience. "We also want to make a promise to our parents," she said, her voice clear and firm. We promise to honor the support and love you've given us, not just with words of gratitude, but with actions. We promise to live in a way that makes you proud, not for what we achieve materially, but for the character we demonstrate." Silent tears rolled down my face as she spoke. Robert held my hand, his own emotion evident in the tightness of his grip. Then, during the simple brunch, I was surprised again when Liam asked for everyone's attention. "We have a special announcement to make," he said, his arm around Chloe's waist. "As you know, this year has been one of great transformation for us. We've learned difficult lessons about responsibility, consequences, and the true meaning of partnership," Chloe continued, beaming. "And now we're about to embark on the biggest adventure of all." She paused dramatically, looking directly at me. "Mom, Dad, you're going to be grandparents next January." A murmur of excitement rippled through the small group. Robert jumped out of his chair, hugging Liam enthusiastically, while I was momentarily paralyzed by surprise and emotion. Chloe walked over to me, concern in her eyes. "Mom, are you okay?" I stood up slowly and wrapped her in a careful hug. "I'm more than okay," I whispered. "I'm so happy for you." Later, as the guests began to disperse, Chloe led me to a stone bench under a flowering tree. "I need to ask you something important," she said, suddenly serious. "What is it, honey? Do you think I'll be a good mother?" The vulnerability in her voice reminded me of the little girl, Chloe, insecure before a school presentation. The question caught me off guard. For a moment, I reflected on everything we had been through. The mistakes I made raising her, the mistakes she made as an adult, the painful lessons, the recent growth. "I think you'll be the mother your child needs you to be," I answered honestly. "Not perfect, no one is, but conscious, constantly learning, loving unconditionally without erasing yourself in the process." She nodded thoughtfully. "I'm afraid of repeating patterns, of being too controlling or too permissive or creating unrealistic expectations. The fact that you're worried about that is already a good sign." I smiled. "And you know what else? You're not alone on this journey. You have Liam, you have us, and most importantly, you have yourself, a stronger, wiser version of yourself. I learned from the best." She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder as she used to do as a child. In that moment, sitting in the garden with my daughter, contemplating the promise of a new life about to come, I felt a deep peace. The circle was closing, in a way, not perfectly round, but with its curves and detours, its lessons and scars. It hadn't been an easy path to get there. The humiliation of that wedding was still a painful memory. But just as the pain of childbirth gives way to the joy of holding a newborn, that suffering had made a rebirth possible, not just for Chloe, but for all of us. And I, who for so long had defined my worth by what I could do for others, was finally learning to exist as a complete being in myself. A woman, a wife, a mother, and soon a grandmother who didn't need to buy love with sacrifice, but could give and receive affection from a place of inner abundance. Sometimes I think we need to lose something valuable to discover our true worth. I lost the image of the perfect daughter, the perfect wedding, the perfect family, but I gained something infinitely more precious: authenticity, for me, for Robert, for Chloe and Liam, and for the child to come, Grandma Ellie. Chloe smiled, playing with the word. "Does it suit you?" "I think so," I replied, imagining what it would be like to cradle that little being, the fruit of so much love and learning, a new chapter for all of us. The arrival of Miguel transformed our family in ways I could never have foreseen. He was born on a cold January morning, a healthy 7.5-pound baby with Chloe's dark eyes and Liam's determined chin. When I held him for the first time, I felt something different from what I had felt holding a newborn Chloe. Back then, it was a mix of overwhelming love and absolute terror. The immense responsibility of shaping that life, of not making mistakes, of being perfect for her. With Miguel, the love was just as intense, but without the weight of ultimate responsibility. I could love him fully, support his parents, but the main journey was theirs, not mine. It was a freedom I had never experienced, the privilege of loving without the constant fear of failure. Chloe surprised me as a mother. I had expected her to reproduce some of my patterns, perhaps the excessive control or the tendency to sacrifice her own needs. Instead, I watched her find a balance I had never managed. "How do you do it?" I asked one afternoon as I watched her breastfeed Miguel while simultaneously working on her laptop on a project for the office. "Do what?" she asked, distracted. "Balance it all. Being a mother, a professional, a wife, without it looking like you're losing yourself in the process." Chloe smiled thoughtfully. "I learned from our mistakes, yours and mine." She adjusted Miguel to her other arm before continuing. "You taught me the importance of caring for others, Mom, but this last year taught me that I can't properly care for anyone if I don't care for myself first." Her words resonated deeply with me. It was exactly the lesson I had taken over 50 years to learn. "Besides," she added with a grin, "I have an advantage you didn't have. A mother who's been through it and is willing to help without trying to control." I laughed, recognizing the truth in her words. In the first few months after Miguel's birth, I worked hard to find the balance between being present and giving space. I offered help but waited to be asked. I gave advice but only when solicited. It was a delicate dance and sometimes we stepped on each other's toes, but we were learning the rhythm together. One particularly exhausting afternoon for Chloe, when Miguel had colic and wouldn't stop crying, I realized how far we had come when she simply called me and asked, "Mom, could you come over? I need help." Those words, "I need help," were something Chloe had rarely said before, and they were like music to my ears, not because my daughter was suffering, but because we finally had a relationship where she felt safe enough to be vulnerable, to ask for support without fear of judgment or control. Robert also blossomed in his role as a grandfather. He who had always been a somewhat distant, emotionally reserved father became the grandfather who would get down on the floor to play with Miguel, who would make up silly songs to make him laugh, who would show up with educational toys he had built in his newly opened carpentry shop. "Who are you, and what have you done with my husband?" I joked one night, after watching him spend an hour making faces to elicit giggles from his grandson. Robert smiled, embarrassed. "I think I never knew how to be a father. I was afraid of messing it all up, of not being good enough. As a grandfather, the pressure is off. I can just enjoy." His honesty made me reflect on how much time we had all lost, trapped in rigid patterns, trying to achieve an impossible perfection, afraid to be simply human. When Miguel turned 6 months old, Chloe and Liam invited us to dinner at their house. It seemed like a special occasion as they asked us to dress up and bring nothing but ourselves. When we arrived, we found the table beautifully set, candles lit, and Miguel already asleep in his crib. Liam opened a bottle of wine while Chloe finished preparing dinner. "What's the occasion?" Robert asked, accepting a glass of red wine. "Gratitude," Liam replied simply, "and an announcement." During dinner, we talked about light topics. My book, which was finally taking shape, Robert's carpentry shop, which was starting to attract regular customers, Chloe's projects at work. It was only at dessert that Liam cleared his throat, getting our attention. "Eleanor Robert," he began, visibly nervous. "First, we want to thank you for everything you've done for us, especially since Miguel was born. Your support has been essential." Chloe continued, "And we also want to acknowledge the journey we've traveled together this past year and a half. It wasn't easy. There were painful moments, but we're building something better, more honest." Robert and I exchanged intrigued glances. What was coming next? "The announcement is..." Liam paused dramatically. "We bought a house." "A house?" I repeated, surprised. Their apartment was small, certainly, but with their finances still recovering after the pre-wedding excesses, I hadn't imagined they could take this step so soon. It's modest, Chloe explained quickly. 3 bedrooms in a quiet neighborhood, perfect for Miguel to grow up in. It'll need some renovations, but Liam can do a lot of the work himself. That's wonderful, I replied sincerely, but I confess I'm surprised. How did you manage it? It was then that Chloe and Liam exchanged a knowing look. Well, that's where the second part of our announcement comes in, Liam said. I was promoted to coordinator of the history department at school. It comes with a considerable raise. And I received an offer to take a junior management position at my company, Chloe completed. The salary is almost double what I make now. I felt a wave of pride and emotion. They had worked hard, saved, planned, done everything the right way this time. But there's more, Chloe said, holding Liam's hand. We want you to know that we didn't accept financial help from anyone for this purchase. Not a single penny. This is our new beginning, based on our own efforts. The message was clear. They weren't repeating the mistakes of the past. They weren't using anyone's money as a crutch. They were building their life with their own resources, within their real means. I'm so proud of you, I said, with tears in my eyes. So proud. Robert raised his glass, a toast to the new house and to this family that keeps learning and growing together. After dinner, while Robert and Liam were discussing renovation plans on the patio, Chloe called me into Miguel's room. The baby was sleeping soundly, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He looks like a little angel when he's sleeping, I commented, adjusting the blanket around him, and a little devil when he's awake. Chloe laughed softly. He's starting to crawl and wants to explore everything. We stood in silence for a moment, just watching this little being who had brought so much love and healing to our family. You know, Mom, Chloe finally spoke, sometimes I think about that day, at the wedding, about the horrible way I treated you. I felt a knot in my chest. That memory, though less painful now, still brought an echo of pain. Chloe, we don't need... Yes, we do, she insisted gently, because I want you to know that that was the worst version of me, the spoiled, egocentric, ungrateful version that you, unintentionally, helped create by never saying no, by never setting boundaries. I nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in her words. But when you finally did say no, when you finally set boundaries, you saved more than just our relationship, Mom. You saved me from myself. She took my hand, her eyes fixed on mine. I'll never forget how I hurt you that day, but I hope to spend the rest of my life showing you that I've learned the lesson. Not just with words, but with consistent actions. I hugged her, feeling the weight of unspoken words, of healing wounds, of a love that had survived the storm. You've already shown it, honey. Every day, every conscious choice, every time you take responsibility for your life, you show it. As I left Miguel's room, leaving him to sleep in peace, I realized a profound truth. Sometimes, the truest love is not the one that gives everything, that sacrifices blindly, that never says no. True love has healthy boundaries, respect, honesty, and above all, the courage to allow each person to find their own path, even through stumbles and falls. And that night, looking at my daughter, no longer the spoiled child I had raised, nor the cruel bride who had thrown me out of her wedding, but a woman in constant evolution, learning to balance her multiple roles with grace and humility, I felt that we had finally found the kind of love that doesn't diminish, but expands, that doesn't suffocate, but liberates. An imperfect love, certainly, but real, and for that very reason, infinitely more valuable. 2 years after Chloe's wedding, my life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. At 56, I was not only the grandmother of Miguel, now a mischievous toddler of almost 2, but also a woman rediscovering her own passions and possibilities. My book, a novel about complex family relationships, inspired, of course, by my own experiences, had been published by a small local press and received surprisingly positive reviews. It wasn't a bestseller, but it brought me a satisfaction that no praise as a mother or wife had ever provided. It was something entirely mine. Robert and I finally took our trip to Europe, spending 3 weeks exploring small towns in Italy and France. It was the first time in decades we had taken a vacation without thinking about Chloe, without checking if she was okay, without worrying if she needed extra money, without planning our activities around her needs. I discovered that I adored art museums, and that Robert had an unexpected talent for finding the best hidden cafes in narrow alleys. We laughed together in a way we hadn't since the beginning of our marriage. We made love in hotel rooms with windows open to medieval squares. I rediscovered my husband as a partner, not just a co-parent. At home, our family dynamic had found a new equilibrium. Chloe and Liam were thriving in their modest house, which they had renovated with patience and creativity. Robert spent hours in his carpentry shop, creating toys and furniture for Miguel. I divided my time between writing, teaching literature classes in a community program, and of course, spoiling my grandson, but always respecting Chloe and Liam's decisions as parents. One Sunday afternoon, we were all gathered for a family lunch in our garden. Miguel was running on the lawn, chasing soap bubbles that Robert was blowing for him. Liam was grilling vegetables and meat while I prepared dessert. Chloe was helping me in the kitchen, cutting fruit for a salad. "Mom," she said suddenly, "do you remember my wedding day?" I stopped what I was doing, surprised by the mention of that day which, by unspoken agreement, was rarely discussed openly. "Of course I remember," I replied cautiously. "I've been thinking a lot about that day lately," she continued, without stopping her strawberry cutting. "Not about what happened between us, but about the wedding itself, the whole show, the waste, the phoniness." I waited, giving her space to elaborate. "You know, we spent a fortune that day. Your money, not ours, which makes it even worse. And for what? To impress people we barely knew, to seem richer and more important than we were, to fulfill some perfect wedding script we saw in magazines and on social media." She put the knife down, looking at me directly. But the real marriage, the real commitment began afterward, in the difficult moments. When Liam confronted me about my attitudes, when we had to completely rethink our lifestyle, when we realized a relationship isn't built with expensive dresses and 5-tiered cakes. I nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. "It's like our relationship," I continued her line of thought. "The real bond between us wasn't in the gifts I gave you or the bills I paid. It was in the willingness to face the truth, however painful, to set healthy boundaries, to rebuild from the ashes." "Exactly," she smiled. "You know, sometimes I think about what would have happened if that crisis had never occurred, if I had remained the same spoiled person and you had remained the bank that never closes." "We'd probably be miserable," I answered honestly. "You always wanting more, me always resentful for giving, but unable to stop." "A toxic cycle," she agreed. "But why are you thinking about that now?" I asked, curious. Chloe took a deep breath. "Because I have some news. I'm pregnant again." Joy exploded inside me. "Chloe, that's wonderful." She smiled, radiant, but there was something else in her gaze, a determination, a maturity that wasn't there in the first pregnancy. "And we want to do everything differently this time, not just the pregnancy and birth, but the entire parenting journey, without unrealistic expectations, without competition, without trying to prove anything to anyone." "Sounds perfect," I replied. "Not perfect," she corrected gently. "Real, authentic, with room for mistakes and learning." At that moment, Miguel burst into the kitchen, laughing and covered in dirt from the garden. Liam followed, pretending to be a monster about to catch him. "Help, Grandma!" Miguel shouted, hugging my legs. I knelt to his level, feigning seriousness. "Don't worry. I'll protect you from that terrible monster." Liam roared dramatically, making us all laugh. I looked at my family gathered in the sunny kitchen. Robert coming in with the platter of grilled meats, Liam pretending to be a monster, Miguel laughing hysterically, clinging to my legs, Chloe, radiant with the news of a new life growing inside her. It was such a different scene from the ostentatious wedding 2 years ago. There were no crystal chandeliers, no expensive dresses, no poses to impress. It was loud, messy, imperfect, and completely genuine. That afternoon, as we served lunch and toasted the news of the new pregnancy, I reflected on the extraordinary journey we had traveled, how a public humiliation, a moment of complete exclusion, had eventually led to this new family we were building. Stronger, more honest, more resilient. The words Chloe had shouted that day, "Get out of here, right now," which had once broken my heart, now seemed almost a blessing in disguise, a necessary breaking point that forced us out of destructive patterns and to build something new. Later, when everyone had gone and Robert and I were cleaning up the kitchen together, he asked, "What are you thinking about? You seem lost in thought." "I'm thinking about how strange life is," I answered honestly, about how sometimes we need to lose something we value to gain something even more precious. Robert nodded, understanding immediately. "Are you talking about the wedding? The incident?" "Yes. If that hadn't happened, if Chloe hadn't thrown me out in such a cruel way, maybe we would have never confronted the problems in our relationship. Maybe I would still be used as a bank. She would still be spoiled. You would still be a passive observer." "It's true," Robert reflected, putting away the last plates. "Sometimes we need to hit rock bottom to find the strength to climb back up." That night, lying in bed next to Robert, I thought about the woman I was 2 years ago, always trying to please, always sacrificing my own needs, always measuring my worth by what I could do for others. And the woman I am now, still generous, still loving, but with clear boundaries and a sense of identity that exists independently of my roles as a mother, wife, and grandmother. The pain of that day would never completely disappear. Some wounds leave permanent scars, but scars are also marks of healing, of survival, of growth. And maybe that's the true essence of family, not the idealized perfection we see in commercials, but the ability to deeply hurt one another and still find a way back, to make devastating mistakes and still rebuild something better from the rubble, to face our worst versions and choose, day after day, to be better for one another. As Chloe had said, not perfect, but real, and for that very reason, infinitely more valuable. As I drifted off to sleep in Robert's arms, I felt a deep peace settle in my heart. The woman who had once been thrown out of a wedding she had financed had found something no money could ever buy: her own voice, her own strength, her own worth. And that, more than any $15,000 dress or 5-tiered cake, was the true treasure I could pass on to my daughter, my grandson, and the new life that was on its way. "Thank you," I whispered into the darkness, not knowing exactly to whom. Maybe to the universe, maybe to that painful moment that had transformed into a blessing. Maybe to the younger version of myself who was finally finding peace. Because sometimes the greatest gift we can receive is the courage to say no and to discover that we are loved not for what we give, but simply for who we are. Now, if you enjoyed this story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments which part left your jaw on the floor.